Well, hi there everybody, Mark here from Nomad Stays. Hope you got the 5-minute warning a little while ago. I'm in my favourite part of the Alps. You can see magnificent day here again. Bit of rain overnight, pushing around 24, 25 degrees. Late summer, still working beautifully here in Europe. Just come out for a walk with my trusted companion, our Chief Happiness Officer, Dakar. Dakar, look, good boy. He keeps us sane in an unsane world. So let's get into this week from our side, from Nomad Stays observation and reading and talking all around the world. So we've seen it coming. We've seen different countries looking at introducing digital nomad visas or extended stay or remote worker friendly programs, and the competition is heating up. A few more countries have added visas onto there, allowing you to work as well as visit for 90 days or longer. Who have we got? Aruba in the Caribbean. How nice would it be to be sitting there on a Caribbean island working and living on a new, what do they call it? A new 90-day work visa. Okay, that's what they've got happening there. Kansas City. Now this is an interesting one. So Kansas City has decided that if you're going to move there and buy a house, of which is about 120,000 average US dollars to buy a house there, the city will pay you $10,000. If you're a remote worker, that is, you know, if you don't need to work there, if you don't need to be looking for a job there, you've got to work a job somewhere else, you can get a good chunk of money back from the state. It's pretty good. Competition's heating up. Okay, there's not many customers around. We have seen the launch of the first smoke-free casino in Las Vegas. Would you believe it? If you've been to Las Vegas, you know that getting out of a casino is hard enough, but getting away from that smoke is pretty awful. Now, as Aussies, where there's almost no smoking left in the country, it's a real affront. Maybe it's great for some people, but I guess the vast majority of people are not all that impressed with it these days. So the competition has hotted up between resorts, countries, as they try and attract what few visitors, I say few is too strong a word, but the reduced visitors happening around the world. And it's a great time to go buying. What do we got? Oh, good news. Mexico. A lot of the architectural sites and historical sites starting to open up again from next week. Really good news. No doubt there's going to be some masks required and social distancing and lots of hand washes around the place. You know, pretty much the standard stuff that's going on all around the world now. You know, here in France, you can't go anywhere without hand washes popping up, even in the middle of the street. We were just downtown in Chambéry, you know, over the hill there, Dont-de-Chot. The other side of the hill is Chambéry, city of about 50,000 people. We were down there this morning, and the whole centre of town is mask only, with hand washers inside and outside buildings, so there's really no excuse. Alrighty, downer. The conservative parts of the world, I'm going to put pretty much Southeast Asia, which includes the Pacific, into there as well. Australia, New Zealand don't look like opening up anytime soon. Thailand is now revising. They were thinking about they might open in January. Now it's slipped to February, only a few weeks after they announced it. It's looking like it might slip again. They're reserving their judgment, as you would expect governments that are terribly worried about infection rates. Malaysia, still closed. Sorry. Beautiful place. Great nomad place. Inexpensive. Fantastic tax system for relocating businesses. Got a lot going for it. Still closed. No sign of opening. Bali, they're hoping. There's so much of the population there that lives off the tourism industry. Yeah, every now and then we see a rumour, but no real delivery. So it looks like being closed again for some time. We're hoping that they might open in December. Could still happen. It's too early to tell. Just be ready. We're talking about the infection rates. Now, as you've probably seen, Europe has got some pretty significant upticks in infection rates. Here in France, we hit 13,500 new cases a day a couple of days ago. So they're starting to tighten down a little bit. The death rate, mortality rate around most of at least the Western world, is exceptionally low. Very good news from that. But what is happening is that neighbouring countries are now starting to designate regions or states which are, or parts of countries that are not permitted to go visit them. So a few days ago, Italy decided that about 7 of the regions, official regions here in France, which is equivalent to a state in somewhere like the US or Australia or Germany. So these regions, 7 of them were under extra caution in travelling to Italy. Now, Italy, if we can't quite see it, it's not far from us. We could be there in about an hour's drive. And as you probably saw a month or so back, we popped over to Italy for a day for lunch just because we could. Today, because we're in one of those regions that is under increased scrutiny, we just can't go there. We can. We can go there with a test, but we need to register that we're visiting. We need to go and see the police, need to show them the test or get one done, need to self-isolate until we get that done. The test is valid for 72 hours. Probably a little bit too much to pop over to lunch at the moment. Germany implemented that a couple of weeks ago as well for a range of these sort of same regions. Switzerland, let me think, Switzerland's probably that way over my shoulder, about an hour's drive. They still have quite a free flow through for border parts. All the bordering neighbourhoods of the neighbouring countries are okay, but if you come from further afield, like from Paris or Marseille or something, you're going into I think it's a 10-day quarantine that Switzerland's put in there, which can be a bit of a bugger because Switzerland, Zurich Airport, is one of those hubs which connects so many places in the world. And so people coming from areas that are under extra scrutiny can't easily go through the same number of hubs as you could before. Some of the places like Singapore, a little bit easier to deal with. Singapore will allow you to travel through, but are not letting anybody stop. So their hub activities, their airport, lovely Changi Airport, they're still going okay, which is fantastic because they're keeping their position in the world hub and spoke airline industry. Okay, what's going on? So tests, it's all about tests. We've been talking about it for a couple of weeks. Tests happening everywhere. Testing this, testing that. A couple of tests if you've sort of gone into quarantine, one at the start, one at the end. If you test positive, you've got a series of 3 other tests. Most countries are kicking in once you're getting determined and, as your health is improving. The problem is the laboratories that are doing all the testing, they're getting overloaded. For instance, here in France, they decided that they would make all the tests free a couple of weeks ago, and it's taking something like 6 days to process a test. All right, most instances that works fine, except for us nomads and remote workers and trying to travel other countries. If we want to do 3 countries in a couple of days, it's going to get a little bit difficult. So we can't actually, you can book a flight, but if you don't have your test results before you get the flight, you might not be allowed to board. And a few nomads have been caught out like that recently. They've lost their money, non-refundable fares, bugger. But usually these fares are not too expensive European style. Still hurts, but you just want to make sure you've got your test in hand before you're ready to go. Now, of course, that means your test is going to be valid. Like we said, a lot of them are 48 hours or even 72 hours. You've got 72 hours to get into the next country. And if you want to go to 2 countries, you've only got 72 hours to, get the test, pack the bag, buy a ticket, get to the airport, make sure there's a flight going, and your connecting flight is there. So it can be a real logistical exercise that you might be facing. Okay. Alrighty. Apps are back. Maybe. Most of the apps around the world, the tracking apps, the COVID Bluetooth-enabled tracking apps, have not worked particularly well. Surprise, surprise. Anyone involved in the tech industry has seen a lot of tech fall over the last couple of years as security and changes have sped up. So a lot of these apps didn't work. The take-up of the population wasn't that high. The highest was something like 22% of the population in a few really compliant societies like Switzerland, but in most places it was a lot lower than that. And not enough to have a significant impact on tracking and tracing. That was still led to human-based tracking and tracing. Some places, if you've been found not to be compliant, where you're being stuck with electronic tags, GPS locators and things like this. People have been locked up. There's a lady a couple of weeks ago locked up in Western Australia. She was sentenced to 6 months after knowingly, illegally crossing a state border and hiding out. Obviously got caught, knew that she'd done the wrong thing. It's a very complicated case, but she got 6 months, so that's under appeal. Everyone thought 6 months is a pretty harsh deal, so that might be going through to appeal. However, the bottom line is that governments are finding tracking and tracing the most successful way to keep a lid on infections. The apps are not working, so apart from having lots of people on the payroll tracking and tracing, they are now having another look at getting the apps right and look like lining up with the big app development companies, the big operating system companies, particularly Google with its Android operating system and Apple with its iOS, its iPhone OS these days. So the big companies have put out principles and development stacks and APIs on how to use this stuff so that it meets the privacy principles that the companies stand for, as well as being able to help the government in this tracking and tracing in this pandemic. So don't be surprised if there's a renewed push around apps, and these apps are now going to talk to each other, at least in Europe, where there is a moderate amount of cross-country flow going on. So the Italian one, I carry two on this phone. I've got the French one, I've got the Italian one. They're going to talk to each other, so I'll only need one going forward. Alrighty. Sorry, just reading my notes here. You can sort of see that. Great debate happening around the world about the lockdowns and isolation. It's very political. Some places like France are doing, their darndest to keep the economy going and keep the damage to people's finances and their jobs very, very light. Other countries, New Zealand, for instance, one of the hardest hit with a very hard lockdown, their economy is taking a pounding. And it's creating a lot of stress and debate, particularly in light of the fact that mortality rates in, again, most of the Western world, very low these days. In fact, there is evidence that there are more people living because of this year's lockdowns than what they would normally do, even without a COVID virus. There in Australia, about 1,000 elderly people didn't die this year that would normally die, which was a fascinating stat. But it's creating the pressure on governments to maybe change their policies. The hospitals are not being overloaded in a lot of the world. The recovery principles are working pretty good for a large number of the population. It's still a nasty disease. People getting it hard are obviously dying. It's painful. It's causing some big damage to a number of people. But the balance of the economy is now becoming a significant talking point and a fighting point. So don't be surprised to sort of see some governments backflipping and tracking, particularly after elections. It seems to be the way that the positions are being held up to an election, and then suddenly they get reversed or eased within a few days after the election's been confirmed. I'm going to finish on a positive note again. A number of news groups and environmental groups are reporting the return of nature around the world as a consequence of not as many people, particularly in national parks and wildlife areas, not as much pollution going into sensitive areas. Wildlife is returning. Now, on the negative side, for instance, there's just been a huge number of pod whales, about nearly 500 pod whales beached themselves in Tasmania, the state at the bottom of Australia, in the last 24 hours. Great, there's pods of 500 pod whales around the place, or pilot whales, sorry, it might be pilot whales. Really bad to sort of see so many die. Again, seems to be a natural occurrence. We don't understand why, but that's on the negative side. But we are seeing the return of nature in other places. So the Yellow River Delta up around Hong Kong, Macau, Guangzhou, they are finding the return of the pink, rare pink and rare white dolphins they haven't seen for a long time. Direct result, they're saying, is of the fewer number of ferries crossing the delta mouth, usually between Hong Kong and Macau. That's the big ferry route, and sometimes Macau up to Guangzhou. And there's a baby boom in the mountain gorillas in Rwanda. Really heartening to see. I had the pleasure of spending some time with the gorillas about 13 years ago when I was backpacking through Africa. One of the most amazing events you can ever do is to hang out with a wild mountain gorilla. But normally there's 1 to 2 born a year. Right now there have been 7 new births in the Bwindi Impenetrable Forest National Park. 7 new births this year already. So a bit of a baby boom going on, maybe from less interference with tourists, but having been up there, I know how strict the government is about group sizes, engagement, and everything to do with these gorillas. So really good to see, and nature, fresh air is definitely the way to go. We're seeing more and more people, again, get out of the cities, get out and enjoy these places like these magnificent mountains and valleys behind us, and the gîtes and resorts and the parasailing, and soon the snow skiing in the Northern Hemisphere, and just getting out and enjoying life while you can. That's all for me this week. Hope to see you next week. If there's anything you need help with, drop us a note, and we'll get the team onto tracking some of the information down. Thanks so much. See you again over at Nomad Stays. Bye for now.